Welcome to MrMcMillanREvis, making revision easier. This tutorial is the second in a series on Edexcel GCSE Religious Studies, Unit 3.3, Marriage and Family Life. In Part 2, we will look at divorce and remarriage. Let's begin by looking at the question, how have attitudes to divorce and remarriage changed? Let's begin with a definition. A divorce is the legal declaration by a court that a marriage has ended. Before 1969, divorce was difficult and expensive in the UK, only being allowed in a small selection of cases for reasons such as domestic violence or adultery. Before this time, divorce was considered socially unacceptable, and those who were divorced were not allowed to remarry in church, and often found themselves socially isolated. As a result, divorce was rare before 1969. In 1969, the Divorce Reform Act was passed by the UK government, and this increased the different possible grounds for divorce. Significantly, this meant a marriage could be ended if it had irretrievably broken down, and neither partner had to prove fault with the other person. In practice, this meant divorces became easier to obtain and cost less in legal fees. Over time, divorce became more socially acceptable, and the number of divorces increased steadily after 1969. In 1960, there were only 28,000 divorces. By the year 2000, there were 155,000. However, in the last decade, divorce rates have decreased slightly, with current estimates suggesting 42% of marriages will end in divorce. These changes to the law reflect changes in attitudes in society. A good example of how attitudes have changed comes from the royal family. In 1936, King Edward VIII was forced to abdicate the throne because he wished to marry Mrs. Wallis Simpson, who was a divorcee. Pressure from the public, the government and the Church of England meant he could not marry her and remain king. By contrast, in 2005 Prince Charles and Camilla Parker Bowles were married in a civil ceremony even though they were both divorcees. They had the support of the Queen, the government, the Church of England and the majority of the British public. What are the different Christian attitudes to divorce and remarriage? Broadly speaking, we could distinguish between the Catholic and the Protestant attitudes. The Catholic Church does not allow for religious divorce or remarriage. Since the Church teaches that marriage is a sacrament, the Catechism states that a ratified and consummated marriage cannot be dissolved by any human power or for any reason other than death. In the Gospels, Jesus says, "What therefore God has joined together, let no man put asunder." To put it another way, when in the marriage vows a person says, "I will love you and honour you all the days of my life," the Catholic Church says that this is a solemn vow which cannot be undone. To put it simply, the Catholic Church does not believe in divorce. However, to give a complete picture, there are three important points we must also note. Firstly, while not allowing for divorce, the Catholic Church does allow for an annulment. An annulment is a declaration that what may have appeared to be a marriage was not in fact a true Christian marriage in the first place. If any of the conditions for a valid marriage were not met, then an annulment declares that the marriage was invalid. This could be for a number of reasons. For example, one of the partners was not fully aware of what they were promising because they were too young, or one of the partners was coerced into the marriage. Secondly, the Catholic Church does allow for the legal separation of spouses if this is for the purpose of protecting one of the partners or the children of the marriage, for example in a case of domestic violence. In other words, the Church does not say that a Catholic must stay living with their partner even if they were being abusive to them. Although this may be a legal separation, in the eyes of the Church the couple are still married, and the Church would hope that eventually reconciliation between the separated spouses might be achieved. Thirdly, because the Catholic Church does not believe in divorce, this means that a legally divorced Catholic cannot remarry in the Catholic Church, since in the eyes of the Church the person is still married to their original partner and would therefore be committing adultery. This is a source of much distress for those divorced Catholics whose numbers, while being lower than national averages, are still significant. We now look at the Protestant attitude. In comparison to the Catholic attitude, the Protestant churches tend to take a more liberal or pragmatic approach to divorce. Although the majority of Protestant churches also believe that divorce is wrong and something that should be avoided, they take the approach that in some circumstances, due to imperfect human nature, a divorce may be the lesser of two evils. In other words, on balance, getting a divorce would do less harm to those involved than staying in the marriage. Protestants point to Jesus' teaching on divorce in Matthew 19:9, in which he speaks against divorce, but allows for it in the case of sexual immorality or adultery. If Jesus sees that divorce is necessary in some situations, then Christians should also be willing to accept divorce too. With regard to remarriage, this varies between denominations, but broadly they argue that since Christianity teaches the concept of forgiveness, churches should be able to support and forgive those whose marriages have broken down, and therefore it is possible that they can remarry in church. For example, in the Church of England, it is at the discretion of an individual vicar whether to allow a particular divorced person to remarry. To summarise, the Catholic attitude to divorce and remarriage is that it does not allow for religious divorce or remarriage. It does allow for annulment. It does not allow remarriage in church for divorced Catholics, but it does allow for legal separation if it is necessary to protect the family. The Protestant attitude is such that it does allow for divorce in some circumstances, because Jesus allowed some exceptions. Although divorce is generally wrong, it may be the lesser of two evils. Remarriage is also possible, depending on the circumstances. Thanks for watching. I've been Mr. McMillan. That's the end of part 2. For the other parts, click the links. If you have found this useful, please give this video a thumbs up and follow me on Twitter. You can also download an audio version of this video from iTunes so that you can listen to it on your MP3 device.